since my color printer is I still have to replace my blue. For some reason, I have a new blue ink, but my printer just doesn't want to acknowledge that I put it in there. So I was like, I'll just try printing it black and white. And honestly, that's really nice for drawing anyway, because then you can really see value and kind of focus on what's light, what's medium, what's dark. So that can be helpful anyway. But color works too, of course. You just have to kind of, you know, do a little extra step, try to almost see it in black and white as much as you possibly can. So I thought we would start with a little warm up today that I thought would be kind of fun, just to sort of loosen us up, and something I sort of like to do when I start drawing sometimes, just to kind of get in the mindset of drawing, just to feel a little bit loose, because sometimes when I sit down to draw, I just feel, I don't know if you all ever felt this way, but I just feel kind of locked up, stiff. Maybe I've been doing something else. So this is something I kind of like to do to warm myself up, but it's silly. It's a little silly. So you're going to have to just kind of trust me and know that this is just to loosen you up. It's not to create a beautiful work of art. But we are going to use our reference photo. So if you have this printed, you can look at it. And I'm going to switch my camera, so then I've got it there too.
There's a lot of noise.
Yeah, and just, if you aren't muted, if you just want to make sure you're muted. And then if you can always, there we go, perfect. That should be good. And you can always pop in, of course, anytime you have a question. So let me, there. Okay. So what I'm gonna have you do, just take a couple minutes and just kind of look at the photo. And if you don't have it printed, you can just look on the screen, or either way, just look on the screen, totally fine. And I can even zoom in a little bit here. Oops, that zoomed in way too much. There we go. So just kind of take some time, and I want you to just kind of notice kind of how it's sitting in the frame a little bit. You know, it's off-centered. I purposely picked this top view because I thought we could kind of focus in on some of these shapes and overlapping and darkness and lightness, but just kind of take some time and just look at it. This is kind of a little exercise that I did in a professional development with some other art teachers. And we live in a world where we see lots of different images constantly on the screen or in everyday life, on the television, whatever. So sometimes it helps to just slow down and spend some time looking at something. We're just going to take some time, just notice kind of how the shapes are. Notice areas where it's really, really dark. Notice areas where the light kind of pops. I've said this before in some other classes, but dark tends to recede and go back in space, where light comes forward and pops out at us. So having a range is how we get that value. Okay, and this is true of whether you're going for hyper realistic or a little bit more stylized. Okay, so what we're going to do, this is a little challenging for the first time you've done this, or will be doing this. So, and this could be on a scrap piece of paper, on just, I have my sketchbook here, but what we're going to do is we are going to try to draw this as fast as we possibly can. Okay, we are going to basically kind of like, almost, if you were in my contour drawing class, almost like a blind contour drawing a little bit, or a continuous contour. It could be kind of a mix of the two. You can look as much as you want, but what you want to try to do is draw as fast as you possibly can. So it's going to look a little scribbly. It's going to look a little overlap. Don't waste your time erasing. There's no time for that. If you make a mistake that you feel strongly about, just draw over top of it. And I'm going to do this exercise with you, and I assure you mine is going to look silly too, okay? Especially because I haven't done this in a little while. So it's a warm-up. Again, the goal here is to kind of loosen our muscles a little bit, draw kind of quickly while looking at something, okay? So it's kind of like a quick little contour study. I used to do this with my students, and I'd say, okay, first time you've got, 10 seconds, then you've got 30 seconds. Then I gave them a minute to draw it. And then we kind of like slowly had more time. So I'm not going to set a timer or anything. I'll just kind of start, but just pick a little starting point and go ahead and just start drawing the shapes and draw as fast as you can. We'll probably look at about like a minute or so. Okay. So get ready, get set, go ahead. I haven't even actually looked at my paper yet. I'm just so focused on looking at the actual image. You still got a little time, so you can keep going. I kind of finished, but. All right, go ahead and stop. Even if you're not done, go ahead and stop. And just kind of see how far you got. You can assess yours. Look at mine. Mine got really big and bubbly. That's just kind of how I draw. I just draw big and bubbly. I write the same way. My letters are kind of that way. But again, the goal of this is just to loosen up, to feel a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more comfortable, laugh a little bit. You know, you can laugh at your own drawing. It's fine. It's funny. Sometimes it's kind of cool. Another thing, if you want to take this a step further, you can get like 5 different marker colors or something and do this exercise, but overlap them and draw the same thing, but maybe rotate your image. And then all of a sudden you have these cool drawings kind of overlapped. So again, I just wanted to start us off with a little warm up, just a little something fun that maybe you want to try on your own sometime if you're feeling blocked or you wake up and you feel kind of stiff. There's just kind of a fun way to loosen up. So today, drawing, a couple kind of things I want to talk about before we get started drawing, and I want you to set this up however you feel comfortable with. Last week, we talked about the grid method, and I did grid the image for you ahead of time using griddrawingtool.com. You can just go to that website and do a digital grid. But if you ever do want to actually grid a printed image, you can easily do that. And so what I would do, and just to show you this too, this is just for helping with proportions. You can even, just divide it in quarters. So sometimes I might just draw like a line down the middle and then, measure my side. So you want to get it 2.5. There we go. So if you want to do something like this and then you have quadrants, you don't have to fully grid the whole thing, but you can at least kind of use this to divide up your space. You could do that. I've also seen artists divide it, instead of having any horizontal lines, they'll just do like maybe 3 vertical lines and divide it into thirds, maybe something like this. So this can just be helpful in the beginning. And you can even kind of make up your own. Let's bring this out a little bit more. There we go. So you can divide into thirds like this too. And then you just kind of have like 3 strips. So this would almost be like rule of thirds, but just using verticals, or you could just use horizontals if you don't want to grid the whole thing. So, you don't have to grid, you don't have to use these measurements, but I just wanted to put that out if you want to set it up because you're really striving for, accurate proportions. I think gridding and dividing and having those little reference lines is the best way to do that. And then you have a couple options for transferring to your paper. Option number 1 would be to measure the exact size of the box if you want to do same size. So you're transferring the exact same size with the grid technique. So just measure your size of your print draw yourself a box the same size, match your grid, and you're good to go. The other way you can do it is you can do what's referred to as a grid enlargement, where you take the same measurements, but you just blow them up so it's a larger scale, but the proportions are still the same. So just to kind of reiterate some of those things, if you weren't here last week and you're interested in the grid, you don't have to use it, but that's a couple strategies for dividing up your paper. So I'm not going to use the grid for mine. I'm just going to go ahead and just be a little bit looser with it, just because I tend to like to draw that way, especially with something a little bit more organic. So I'm just going to talk to you kind of about getting started on this and setting it up. So regardless if you want to do the grid or not, I had you start by looking at all these different shapes that we're seeing here. And I picked this succulent on purpose because I thought all these little overlaps of shapes could transfer into other types of flowers or other types of things you might want to draw in the future. So what I do when I'm starting to draw something is I just pick a starting point. And I think this is whatever you decide is the starting point. But for me, I kind of, if it's something radial, circular like this, I kind of like to work from the center outward because I feel like I have more control over my shape and proportion with not using a grid. Okay, so I just kind of identify these. They're almost like little manipulated little triangles. So I almost am going to start with that, whatever one you want to begin with. And I did the same thing actually when I started drawing it quickly. And that's kind of how I knew this is where I would go, is because that's initially what I started drawing. And keep in mind, the more realistic you want your drawing to be, the more accurate you want your shapes to be. So if you notice something like, oh, this line needs to actually be curved in a little bit, take a minute to erase it and actually curve it in. You know, take your time with your shapes in the beginning if you need to. We can slow it down. Just because I had you draw fast in the beginning doesn't mean we have to draw fast now. We can slow it way down. We can take our time. We can look at shapes. And then, you know, some of you are going to prefer to draw quickly. You prefer to do really sketchy style drawing and then refine. And that's okay too. That's actually how I was taught to draw in art school, was to draw really quick gesture drawing really, really fast like we did in the beginning. And then we would do straight line construction and refine all our angles after. It's a really long, tedious process, but it's also really efficient. So we'll even do some classes on more traditional still life drawing, and I can show you some of those methods for sighting angles and that style of drawing too. But I think starting like this and doing some contours and just focusing on shapes is just training your eye to be more observant, and then connecting that, you know, that muscle memory, that kind of hand-eye coordination. You know, other things I look at are kind of like proportions, or I'll notice, you know, gaps in between. Like, for example, I drew this gap way larger than it actually is. So this is why I kind of slow down. I can erase it a little bit. I can fix that if I need to. But again, sometimes when we draw, we don't care if our reference is, if it's perfect to our reference. You know, that's not our point. The point is to kind of create something fun and loose based on a reference image. So, you know, I always say these kinds of things in classes because it just depends on what your personal goals are as an artist. And, you know, feel free to communicate those with me. If you ever want to email me and just kind of let me know how I can support you as an artist. For example, if you want to be better at realistic drawing, you can let me know, and then I know how to support you. Whereas if you want to be, you know, a little bit looser and learn how to kind of be more expressive with your drawing, let me know that, and I can help you achieve those goals too, because there's really so many styles of art. But I think doing these types of drawings and exercises where we're just observing and looking, this is what's going to help us learn to see. It's going to train our eyes. So as you can see, I'm just starting to build these shapes. It's very part to whole, the way I'm drawing right now. And the other thing you can do is if you're having a little trouble seeing, what I try to do is almost draw the shapes where I see a shift in value. So if I see a shift in value, like it goes from dark to light to dark, I will illustrate those and draw those with lines, because then when I come back in shade, I know it needs to have a dark value or a light value based on where those lines are. Or, you know, if you decide to keep your drawing just a contour drawing, then those lines help illustrate value for you and show, you know, different planes. You could also add color to this when you were done too. Go. Yeah, anywhere you see just like a little shape. And you know, if this is getting tricky for you, let me show you one other thing you can start doing. Because for some people's eyes, you might look at this and have a hard time kind of finding your place over here. So what you can do is, because I know this is super dark in here, I can actually just start rendering a little bit of value in there as I'm working. You don't have to do this, but you can do this. For some people, it's just helpful for them because they can differentiate these different shapes. They can start to see some value in there, and it's a helpful thing, especially if you're newer to drawing. Just kind of soften that up. And you know, the helpful thing of having a black and white image, I will say as well, is you can really see your values. So you know what needs to be pushed super duper dark and what is kind of medium, and then what would be referred to as a highlight or a really light area. So adding some of this can just kind of help start to transfer. I can even add just a little bit of value here. And I'm just using an HB pencil right now, which is equivalent of a number 2 pencil. And I'm just varying, you know, my own pressure. Just adding a little bit so we can start to see some of this forming. Okay. Draw this in. But again, I just kind of, wherever there's like a little shift in a color or a value, that's a good spot to put a line. The other thing that can actually be super helpful when you're a beginner drawer is to draw the same thing multiple times. You know, pick a reference image or pick an object, could be like a bottle or a vase or something like that. And if you just kind of pick an object and just draw it every day and spend, even if it's a quick little sketch, you just get to know, you learn so much about shape and form, and again, it's that muscle memory, that practice. So I definitely, you know, some of you, I've mentioned this too, that I paint more than I draw. And so sometimes if I'm sitting down to render a full drawing, which I just don't do as often, you know, I have to brush up on some things. I have to remind myself, you know, some of those little skills and things to think about. So again, that's why that beginning little exercise is so nice. I'm just kind of adding a little bit of value as I go again, just so you can start to see kind of that shape starting to form. Bring this down here. And sometimes, again, I don't worry about like a grid with something like this, because in my opinion, you know, no succulent's exactly identical anyway. So if my leaf, is slightly wider than and shorter than what I'm seeing in the image. For something like this, it doesn't matter so much in my own opinion. But again, if realism and really copying a reference is your goal, then that grid is going to help you with that. But usually I feel like drawing kind of piece by piece, it just naturally, you kind of figure out where to go next. You know, a drawing like this, you can always turn it around too and turn the image upside down or shift your paper around too and look at it from a different angle. Sometimes that can be really helpful. I know sometimes I feel like we just kind of have angles that feel a little bit more comfortable than other ones. I've said this before too. I feel like drawing a lot of times is like building Legos, you know, or building anything really, or just seeing all these little pieces start to come together. This around. And again, you can just kind of decide if you like kind of shading as you go or if you'd rather wait to the end. Either is totally fine. If you find that you are getting smudgy, you know, you could always grab a second sheet of paper and lay that over top too, just for your arm to rest on. I tend to be that artist that gets pencil all up and down their arm. I often too just like use my finger and just, you probably sort of notice that I do this, but you know, just kind of sharing helpful tips that work for me. Just pointing and kind of following along with my finger is helpful when I'm drawing something from a reference like this and when there's all these little different pieces, you know, because sometimes even I'm like sitting here, I'm like, oh, did I draw this one already? Or, you know, I'll get mixed up a little bit. But you know, you can translate. We've done some roses in this class too, but you know, same kind of idea. Um, Anything really that's all these little parts to a whole could be approached in a very similar way. And like I said, I noticed like some of my shapes are a little bit bigger, but you know, that's just kind of my style of drawing. I'm purposeful with that in the sense that I like to just be a little bit looser and whimsical. And to me, that's like putting my own style, my own self into something, especially if you're using a reference, right, that somebody else took. I think it's fun to personalize it and make it your own somehow. So, you know, don't be afraid of your own drawing style. I think that just kind of naturally is going to start unfolding. It's like we all hold a pencil differently, we all have different handwriting, so naturally we just all draw differently. And I kind of resisted my style for a long time just because I was a little heavy-handed and, you know, some of my pencil lines were like a little bit more streaky before I learned, you know, some other types of shading techniques. But now I've kind of learned to take some of the new skills I've learned with my just natural way of drawing, just because I think that's just, it's in us. We learn new skills, but some of our style is in us, I think. Hopefully you can start to see that start to form and come around. But again, seeing a little bit of value in here, again, pushes that backward. So as we're starting to draw, I think that can just be helpful to see. You know, you make up your own mind if you find that you don't want to shade as you go, which I will admit, normally I don't shade as I go. I shade at the end. But for this, I thought it might be nice for you to just kind of see what you could do. And even sometimes I might use the shading just to kind of help create a shape a little bit, kind of like through here, how it kind of goes darker and then starts to go medium. So you can even just kind of rather than drawing that shape, just kind of start shading with your pencil, and that line will just sort of naturally form. But again, all we're really doing here is just breaking down shapes and lines. The value is what helps us make it look like a form, what makes it look three-dimensional, right? Because anything we draw on paper is flat. It's 2D because it's on paper. So just keep that in mind. The beginning layer is really about shape. And you know, we need lines to make up shapes. So, you know, you can think about directions of lines, angles, placement. Is it thick? Is it thin? And even, you know, my shading I'm putting in here definitely isn't as dark as it eventually will be, but I'm just doing it to, again, so we can differentiate our shapes here. Like this is an example where in the actual image it goes further out. Mine kind of came in a little bit closer. Again, I'm not gridding this or anything like that, so I can make a little change if I want, but again, nobody has to see your reference image to your final either. This can be its own thing. But, you know, think about how, especially like in this one right here, we see some shadow kind of bringing it down, right? And then there's dark here, but then we see this little highlight going across the top. That's what gives it kind of plane or dimension, meaning this side looks like it's going down, whereas this side looks like it's starting to bend around. So keep in mind, if you see those little shifts, to put those in. And the other thing you can do, especially that's why I've shown some of you this before, but I love this little clickable eraser. It's refillable. It's got like a little bit smaller than a normal eraser. So it's really good for, you know, pulling out little highlights or something if it gets too dark. So keep in mind, you can always kind of be subtractive as well. If something gets too dark, you can always lighten it back up with an eraser, or if you have a kneaded eraser, that can work. A little bit of shadow in here. Another really fun exercise, if you have any ribbons or bows in your home, like gift wrap supplies, laying some of those out in front of you and trying to draw those and looking at the actual folds in person and the way the curves kind of go. I've had my students do that before. They turn out really, really cool. And it's a very similar way of drawing, as you're just kind of breaking down all these little shapes. But yeah, we'll definitely get going. We'll get some more traditional still life drawing classes going to kind of some multi-session classes, because I think that's really going to help improve your skills as well. Just drawing from direct observation. Photo references, of course, I mean, they're good, they're handy. We've talked about how sometimes in our brain, we don't always see things how they actually are. For example, how we draw that corner sunshine with the beams coming down, but that's not actually what the sun looks like. Our brain tends to want to turn things into symbols. It's just kind of how we work. But drawing from observation breaks that habit, and especially drawing observation in real life. So, you know, maybe over the next week or so, as you're kind of spending some time in your home, look around at objects that you have that might be interesting to set up together and draw. Could be dishes, could be actual like fruits, vegetables, flowers, real or fake, you know, anything. I actually had a student one time, I have like an old skeleton from a science class in my classroom, and she put that in her still life, and it was so cool. So little sculptures, little trinkets, anything fun. But see just over the next little week or so, just kind of take note at what you have that might be interesting for you to draw. And if you're feeling ambitious, you could even take it, set it down, and try drawing it. Kind of as a little see how you do before some of the instruction. Let's see, bring this guy around. Starting to get there. And like I did kind of this outside one, and then I can fill in this one. So it's like I don't really have a specific way I do it necessarily, or order that I draw in. It's just kind of more what feels right to draw next is what I would draw next. And then things are just going to start to come together. And as they're starting to come together, like I mentioned before, if there's things that need to be erased, things that need to be changed, that's okay. Nobody said you had to draw it perfect the first time. Some people kind of are sketchy and they just kind of embrace their little mistakes as part of it and do lots of kind of overlapping lines, whereas some people like cleaner lines and like it to be a little bit more streamlined. So again, just think about what you like the look of. We'll start taking a look at some artists too, so that way if you're not sure what you like the look of, we can help you figure that out too. Let's see. Now it's always kind of like satisfying, I think, at the end, or as you start to get a lot of your shape in and you can start to kind of see it come out. I think that's always really a rewarding part of drawing. And just keep in mind, you can let your lines like overlap a little bit. It doesn't have to be one continuous line. And you can always be more sketchy in the beginning and just as easily come back in and clean that up by coming back over top. Or sometimes what I'll do is then erase kind of my sketchy line and then come in and just kind of clean it up with a nice clean line. So, just some ways you can manipulate. Just the first layer of pencil doesn't have to be exactly what it looks like. Just like painting, drawing is lots of layers as well. Layers of lines, layers of shading. You can see I kind of just continued this around and I kind of stopped some of my shading too, just to show you how I might approach drawing this without shading first. Let's see, this guy, we're getting close. Pretty close to having all my little petals in here. Now, see how it kind of cuts off the edge? Now, I didn't frame mine or anything, so I could, make it up and just kind of continue this if I want to, or I could, draw myself a line. I could just take my ruler and say, okay, this is the edge. So if I wanted to do something like that, I could just to crop it. And then it kind of goes up here too. So just to show you, sometimes I'll draw little frames around my sketches, not always, but sometimes. So if you want to do something like that, just to give it a little frame, you totally can. Up to you. And again, I didn't grid, so my proportions, they're not perfect, but I'm okay with it. So I'm just going to sort of make up some edges here and just kind of continue them in. That's something I'm always telling my students too. Remember, you're the artist and you get to make up stuff if you want to. You know, you can change anything in your drawing that you want. It's the exciting thing about it. And so like this little gap in the back, I'm just gonna kind of fill it in dark. And I'm still just using an HB pencil. So something you can do, depending on if you have different drawing pencils or not, you can just kind of go in and almost like what we do when we're painting, we sort of block in value. So meaning you can just kind of take one single pencil and just kind of draw in almost like we're already doing. But for the rest of it, you can just kind of start locking in your shading. Because if you have other pencils like a B or a 2B, 4B, 6B, depending on what you may have, you can use those pencils on top of this initial HB to then darken. A more layer of pencil going over top of each other in different directions is going to blend it just with the pencils. So I always like to stress you can blend just with pencils. Keep in mind, if you have like a blending stump too, you can even, for areas like this, I could kind of smooth what I drew here. This requires less blending with just my pencils, but then you can kind of use this to block in value too. You can almost, because there's graphite left on it, use these as well. But again, this is just going to give you a different look. It gives you a really soft blended look. And so sometimes when you blend it out, you have to bring more value back into it to darken that back up. Just keep in mind, you never want to blend with your finger. If you don't have an actual blending stump, you could, oops, camera, you could also use just like a little piece of Kleenex or bath tissue and just kind of wrap it around your finger, or you know, even the back of a pencil. And you could use that too. I could, you know, just kind of go in and soften all these little graphite areas. But then what I do is just keep using my HB pencil and going around, just paying attention, like I mentioned before, is if there's a little white kind of strip or a highlight, you can kind of pencil that out or draw a little line so you know that it needs to stay light, but you could just as easily pull it out with your eraser too. And so like all this area here, like I could actually bring this in a little bit and crop this more to be true to this. But like, I note that this is like, it's pure black in this image here. So I know that when I start to add value, that's what I'm working toward, is super duper dark. Okay, so don't be afraid to really push your pencil too. And I'll even just show you, see how you can see on the screen. Like this is so this is HB. This is a 6B I have in my hand. So if I put, and I'm not even doing super heavy pressure, if I take this and put this on top of that HB, I mean, it just, whoo, it pushes that dark. But then if you look here to here, I'm matching that value. Okay, so that's kind of the next game you're playing, if you want to break it down kind of like that, is you're matching values after you've drawn all of your basic shape. And I actually just realized I missed, that's why it looked kind of funny here. I'm missing one. Let's see. It's like there was like a gap. And I was like, why is it such a big gap? I'm gonna bring this out a little bit more. Go. Same kind of thing. I'm just extending this because it's I drew my crop a little bit different than what it actually is, but that's okay. There, that looks a little bit better, a little bit more rounded. And you know, there's little things you can do like this. Like I kind of will assess kind of different shapes. Like this, for example, could be a little bit bigger. Can pull that out. You know, the other thing to think about is if you want the pot in there too, which I think after you get the succulent leaves, you can almost just sort of loop it around. But you could also trace something too, like a you know, portion of a bowl or something. Sometimes freehanding stuff is just, it's good practice. Keep that in mind. Even if it's not turning out exactly how you want, every time you draw, it's more and more practice, and the better you're going to get. So now doing something like this, I know like I can match all these dark, dark, darks kind of going around. So that could be something, you know, I start working on. And when you're shading, you can decide, you can kind of hop around, or you can stay kind of centralized and work from one part to the next. You know, I see artists do it all different types of ways. It's, again, it's that what's comfortable to you. I tend to, I've mentioned this to some of you before, I just tend to be impatient and like to hop around, and just, to me, that's exciting to just work in different areas and see the different areas evolve. So that's kind of what I like to do. But with pencil, you have that nice luxury of, it's easy to hop back and forth between your different pencils, or if you're not using different pencils, it's easy enough to change the pressure of heavy pressure for dark or light pressure for lighter values, for example. So as far as that goes, it doesn't matter if you work dark to light, light to dark in that sense. It's more or less just making sure, especially if you're using a reference photo, matching it. And then knowing that the more you layer your pencils, the more blended too they'll become. So like here's just HB. Now I could do all the different Bs layered on top, but I personally don't find that necessary. So I'm just going straight to my 6B. And again, this is gonna get it pretty dark. Now you could get like an 8B, but true graphite's never going to be pure black ever, just because it's not, but you can still render it pretty dark to match those values. And so if I just use my 6B pencil with no HB underneath it, what's going to happen is, because my B is so soft, it doesn't get into all the valleys in my paper. So that's why the advantage of shading with a little bit of a harder graphite first, that allows me to kind of indent that paper, start to indent that paper, that process, so that when I put the darker pencil on top, it's getting rid of those little white areas, not making them show up. Again, I've mentioned this too, but one of my favorite ways to shade is to scumble, which is little circles. So you're just moving your wrist in little circles. Okay, keep in mind you can also do things like hatching or cross hatching. You can even, you know, scribble as you shade too, you know. For example, like in here, you can even take like little scribble lines and then just kind of loosen them up for lighter values, just to show you something else. And you can scribble so much that they're really almost kind of blended. Just keep in mind, blending is really layering. So when you're saying blending, it's layering, or you can kind of smudge it out or smooth it out with a blending stump. And then again, as always, you can use your eraser to pull out areas or highlights if you need to. Don't be afraid to reshape something if you feel like the shape is off. But I guarantee if you sat down tomorrow at some point and attempted to draw the same succulent, it'd be even better the second time. Because you've already spent some time with it now and looking at the different shapes and different angles, and the more you're looking at something, the more you're getting to know it. This is an example too, because I'm just going to kind of hop over here and start adding in some value. I'm all over the place today working on this, but I just want to show you too, this is like what I might do to like cover this up so I can just lay my hand here and shade without this all turning into like a mess. So that's an example of what I would do here. And then I can just kind of start putting in, you know, those darks. So using another piece of paper will just help keep things clean if you run into that issue like me. But I'm one of those people that anytime I have pencils out, if I don't do this, I end up with it all over. So, and, you know, you can just kind of move it around as you need to. But sometimes, you know, kind of framing in this kind of large area that's just really dark, there's not a lot of complicated shading. Sometimes that's why I might start there. But the shading, just like when you pick a starting point with the drawing, you can kind of decide. I can bring this in. I think that, you know, the biggest thing with shading is you just want your application of the graphite to be consistent. You don't want it to look streaky. You don't want it to, you know, have super heavy pressure all of a sudden and then go into light pressure, you know, without there being a blend, unless that's actually what it does. But the biggest thing I can stress, I think the most important tip is to just draw it as you see it. If you see it and it looks super duper dark, as black as it can be on here, then that's what I try to do. And I try to match that to the best of my ability to render that value. And this is true whether you're stylizing or not, because value is crucial in things that are stylized too, because it's the way we see depth. So anytime you want to create depth or dimension or have anything like that, you have to have value into it. Otherwise you won't be able to. And so like if I'm kind of a couple more things I'll mention before we kind of check in, I'd love to see how everyone's doing. But I just want to mention kind of like this area, for example. So like when I initially started drawing this, I just kind of like put a loose kind of shading over it. But when you get really close to it, I almost noticed there's actually a shape here that's really dark, that's a shadow from this petal being cast. So those are like the little details I'll look for. So I'll say, okay, this is a shadow. This needs to be really dark. Okay, and actually it's a little bit darker up here. And that's what I mean by matching. And the more you do this, just naturally, the more realistic it's going to be, because realism is just having as much information there as possible, meaning information, meaning color, accurate color, texture is accurate, you know, those types of things. And the more you play with your graphite and manipulate and draw, you're going to start to figure out all the different things it's capable of doing too. But you know, from here, this is the part I love. I mean, the initial drawing for me is always fun, but I love to see the transformation part. And to me, that's what starts happening when you add value to a drawing, because all of a sudden it'll start kind of popping off the page at you. The other kind of tip before we kind of check in, I'll have to finish this one up too, because I do like how it's coming out. The other thing I'll say is don't forget to step back from this, okay? You've been so close to it, and especially this particular view of this succulent, because it's like we're looking down bird's eye style at it and seeing all these shapes. So taking a step back from it and looking at it from a distance, squinting at it, or, you know, taking it back like this and just kind of holding it up and looking at it, maybe squinting at it, that's going to help you, okay? And then again, just last thing I'll say, even at this stage, I can make changes, okay? I try to make all my line changes before I shade. That's why I do all my lines, then shade. But again, for the demo, I wanted to just kind of show you some different things of how to differentiate all these different leaves as they come together. But keep in mind, you can still change things. Like this one, for example, like, you know, I could make this bigger if I wanted to, or this one over here, actually this point, I made the point bigger than the point actually is. Those are little tweaks that will help your drawing look more realistic. Those are often the tweaks that some I care about, some I don't, because I'm just a little bit looser and I just kind of go with the flow. And like I said, when you remove this from the equation and this is all finished, I will just have a succulent here with a top view, right? You know, nobody's going to be like, well, Jen, you know, this point is bigger than this point, you know. That's just kind of up to you to decide if that matters to you or not, you know. But I'd love to just kind of pop in and let me turn my camera on a minute. Some water. So if anyone would like to pop in, show theirs, share how they did, thoughts. Ooh, Susan, love it.
It's a mess, I think.
Carol, you think yours is a mess?
Yeah. I don't know if you can see it or not.
Oh yeah, Mark, that's looking lovely. Really nice rendering. Yes.
Nice.
Beautiful.
Oh, Mark's is beautiful. Yep.
Yeah, I love that. Oh, wonderful. Cheryl, that looks good.
Hi.
You used the grid.
Yes,
Helpful.
I thought I would try it again because it didn't work for me last time, but I wanted to try it again.
How'd you feel about it today?
Better because the dimensions were the same, so it was right in here.
That's helpful.
I had a problem with the center though. I just can't, I don't see a center like.
I see what you're saying. I almost think what might help you, you could even take an eraser and erase what you did in the center.
Okay.
And then try to it's kind of funny doing this backwards, but if you can just, there's almost like these three little triangle shapes in the center.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So if you draw them as, they're like distorted triangles, of course, but like if you kind of draw those little triangles first and then kind of do some dark shading around them, that might help you see that center.
All right. Thank you.
Absolutely. Carol, did you want to show yours?
Well, it's a mess because I had big trouble with the center. What do you?
You had trouble with the center too?
Yeah,
I think you might have to turn your, I think your video is off.
Pardon?
I think your video is off.
Oh. See, it looks pretty bad. Can you see it?
Can you hold it up to your camera?
Nope.
If you hold it up to your camera.
There,
a little bit higher. A little bit higher. Put it like by your face, like that.
Okay.
There you go. Oh, I can see it. Absolutely. You're getting there.
Yeah.
So same kind of thing. I think breaking down shapes is going to be helpful.
Yeah, I just can't
Absolutely.
see these and mix them. I
Look
don't
at
know
it.
what's
Look
with
at
my
it.
eyes.
Absolutely. Oh, Lee, beautiful.
Oh, Lori's.
And
I
Lori.
love Lori's. Yeah.
You
It's,
do?
Yes.
Oh, that is
Yes.
I'm I had trouble with the middle, as you can tell, but I really like, I'm kind of have to go back and play catch up with the shading and values and all that. I find that fascinating because it really, like you said, the dark colors or the back, it brings out the light, and I just was kind of messing around with it. So, but
And
I
that's
had
kind of
trouble
why I
with
did that
the
today.
middle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. So, actually, based on kind of some of your feedback, let's see Edith's a minute.
Can you see?
Oh, yeah. Yep. Really nice.
I'm happy with it because I've never done
Oh,
this.
wow.
Oh, nice.
So
That's
I
lovely.
thought it came out okay for being new at it.
I
Yeah.
think so.
Lovely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know, Edith, I think you mentioned a really good saying that for many of you, this is new. And when we do something brand new,
Hey,
it takes time for sure to get better at it. So I think everyone
And
did
it
a
hurts the
phenomenal job.
brain too. It hurts the brain tremendously.
It makes you work, right? Drawing
does.
activates
does.
your brain. It does.
Mine has a cup of tea with steam coming out of it.
Oh, doesn't it? Yeah.
Either
Oh,
that
that's
or the
amazing.
beta fish from last week.
That's amazing. It's just smaller.
No, but it's really fascinating with those, like I said, with the different the HB and the 2 and the 4 and the 6. It really makes quite a difference.
It does.
It gives it that depth, and I enjoy learning about it.
It
So
does.
thank you.
Is there anyone in class currently that does not have a range of pencils?
what?
Does everybody, if you don't have all the pencils, like I would love to send you a set if you don't have them. So that would be a 2H, HB, 2B, 4B, and 6B. If you don't have at least 5 pencils, will you email me? And I will send you 5 pencils so you can have a range. And if you just want me to send you 5 pencils anyway, just email me and I'll send you 5 pencils anyway.
Sweet. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And they're the Prismacolors are the ones I'm using. I have these for days in my classroom. I have so many of them. I would love to send some out to you. And I have some kneaded erasers and some like white block erasers I can toss in there too. That way everyone kind of has like a little kit of what we're using. And you know, you got some bunny ears, Cheryl.
Are you making bunny ears on my head?